Hi, good morning, good evening, everybody. Aloha. Welcome back to night 2 of the summer session for 2025. So we are really happy to have you here in person and online. I'm Reverend Blaine Higa, the director of the Buddhist Study Center, and I'll be your host for this evening's session. And so as we begin tonight, let's take a moment to kind of offer our thoughts of love and kindness and aloha, as we observe the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, which actually happened, it's already tomorrow in Japan. And so I know there was a ceremony this morning at the Torii Gate down in Mo'iliili. Bishop, I believe, attended that. So please join me in Gosho, and let's offer a moment of silence for peace in our world. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namanda Butsu. Namanda Butsu. Namanda Butsu. Namanda Butsu. Namanda Butsu. Namanda Butsu. Thank you. Oh, come on in. And thank you for moving up. Just like school, I know everyone likes to sit in the back of the classroom, but this is a friendly crowd, so don't feel shame and just come up closer. Reverend Enrique doesn't bite, so but again, thank you for coming. And so for those of you joining us for the first time this evening, we welcome Reverend Dr. Enrique Galvan-Alvarez from Manchester, England, to Hawaii. This is the first time coming to Hawaii, and he presented last night here, but also made presentations to the neighbor islands, to Kauai, Maui, the Big Island, and Oahu districts. Born in the Spanish Canary Islands, he's a longtime resident of the UK, where he earned his PhD in modern languages in 2011, and now is a full professor of an online university. He encountered Tibetan Buddhism in 2003 and discovered Reverend Dr. Al Bloom's writings in 2011, and subsequently began a 5-year-long correspondence with the late Dr. Bloom, and has led him to Kyoshi, Tokudo and Kyoshi ordination as a Shin priest. So he is a leader in the European Shin Buddhist sanghas and is a mentor for 4 Tokudo aspirants from Spain, Germany, Belgium, and who will seek ordination in October of this year. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Enrique Sensei.
Thank you so much, Reverend Higa, for the very kind introduction. My pleasure to be here again today. And I'm so glad to see so many of you again. So yesterday didn't go that badly. So you came back. Good. So today we will continue through this journey. If we could share the PowerPoint. Okay, that's great. Thank you. So just to remind you of the structure of this summer seminar. Yesterday, I wanted to introduce myself a little bit, also to get to know you a little bit. I talk a bit about my personal journey, my encounters that had led me to Jodo Shinshu, to where I am now. And now the next 3 days is more like the core of what I wanted to share with you. And this somehow maps onto Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So today we will be talking about Shakyamuni Buddha from the perspective of relationship, again, which is the central theme of the summer seminar. So today we're going to be focusing on the life of Shakyamuni Buddha. Tomorrow we will talk about, we could say, that is the Dharma, what Amida is, what Namo Amida Butsu is as a relation. And on Thursday we will be talking about the Sangha, about those around us and how they lead us to realization, how they lead us to awakening. And day 5, well, that's still too far, so I'll talk about that later. But that's somehow unrelated to the next couple of days. So I have been starting by reminding you of how I'm looking at the 3 treasures, if this would allow me. Yep, there we go. So I'm thinking of awakening, of Buddha, as the dynamic process, the path by which we come to realization, always in relation to another person, another being. I'm thinking of the path of the Dharma as the journey of realization, awakening, which is informed by many encounters with fellow walkers. Again, a sense of relationship. And the sangha is in itself this relationship, is the dynamic connection that brings us to realization, to awakening, what enables us to traverse this path, to travel on this journey. And so, in this spirit, like I said yesterday, I encourage you, I invite you to interject at any point. Do not see it as an interruption. If you have any thoughts, please share them, and let's walk this path together. So today we're going to be talking about encounter, but not in the context of my life. And so I want to start with a very long quotation. So please bear with me and feel free to read along. Following the virtues of the Mahasattva Samantabhadra, they were all endowed with the countless practices and vows of the Bodhisattvas, and firmly abided in the fulfillment of all meritorious deeds. Traveling freely in all the 10 quarters, they employed skillful means in awakening others and gained access to the treasury of the Buddha Dharma, thereby reaching the other shore. Appearing in countless worlds, they manifested the attainment of perfect enlightenment. These bodhisattvas, while dwelling in Tushita heaven, expounded the true Dharma. Then, after leaving the heavenly palaces, each of them descended into his mother's womb. Immediately after his birth from her right side, he walked 7 steps. A brilliant light shone from his body, illuminating all the 10 quarters, and countless Buddha lands shook with 6 kinds of tremors. He then said, I shall become the supremely honored one in the world. Chakra and Brahma reverently paid homage to him, and devas and human beings took refuge in him. He demonstrated his aptitude in mathematics, the literary arts, archery, and horsemanship. He was proficient in the divine arts and was well versed in traditional literature. He enjoyed practicing the martial arts and testing his ability in the rear gardens, and appeared to exhibit his indulgence in the pleasure of the senses in the palace. Having seen into old age, sickness, and death, he realized the impermanence of the world. Thus, each bodhisattva renounced his kingdom, wealth, and status, and went into the mountains to seek the way. After sending back the white horse that he had been riding, together with the jewel crown and ornaments he had been wearing, he removed his exquisite garments and put on a Dharma robe. Then he shaved his beard and the hair on his head and sat upright under a tree, striving to carry out ascetic practices for 6 years in the prescribed manner. Since he had come forth into the world of the 5 defilements, he behaved like one of the masses. Appearing to be covered with dirt and grime, he bathed in a golden river. Then a deva bent a branch of a tree so that he could climb up the bank. Divine birds fluttered about, following him to the location where he would attain awakening. A man named Auspicious perceived a favorable sign and glorified the merit and virtue of the bodhisattva. In appreciation of this gesture, the bodhisattva accepted the grass that the man offered, spread it under the Bodhi tree, and sat upon it with his legs crossed. Then he emitted a great radiant light, by which Mara became aware of what was happening. Mara came with an assembly of kinsmen to attack and thwart him. However, the bodhisattva brought them under control through the power of wisdom and forced them to surrender. He then realized the exquisite Dharma and attained the highest perfect enlightenment. Chakra and Brahma then entreated and requested him to set the wheel of the Dharma in motion. Traveling freely, he roared with the thunderous voice of a Buddha, beating the Dharma drum, blowing the Dharma conch, wielding the Dharma sword, hoisting the Dharma banner, rolling the Dharma thunder, flashing the Dharma lightning, pouring down the Dharma rain, and extolling the Dharma gift. He continuously awakened the people of the world with the sounds of the Dharma. The light he emitted illuminated countless Buddha lands and shook the entire world with 6 kinds of tremors. The light entirely encompassed Mara's realm and made his palace shake. Mara and his assembly, trembling with terror, all surrendered without exception. He tore to shreds the net of falsehood, extinguished all wrong views, swept away the dust of affliction, and destroyed the mote of desire. He firmly protected the Dharma castle and opened widely the Dharma gates. Washing away the grime of passions, he revealed his original purity. He elucidated the Buddha Dharma, guiding people to the right teaching. He entered a town to beg and receive alms of savory food, thus indicating to others that he was a field of virtue so as to enable them to accumulate merit. Whenever he wanted to expound the Dharma, he displayed a congenial smile. Using the various teachings as medicine, he cured the three kinds of suffering. He revealed the immeasurable merit of the mind aspiring for enlightenment and endowed the bodhisattvas with a prediction that they would attain equal, perfect enlightenment. Finally, he manifested passing into nirvana and yet limitlessly brought people to emancipation, leading them to eradicate the blind passions, plant many roots of virtue, and acquire merit. His working was thus excellent and beyond measure. Furthermore, traveling freely to the various Buddha lands, he spread the teaching of the way. His practices were pure and untainted. Just as a magician could at will create various illusions, such as the forms of a man or a woman, by employing his perfected knowledge and clear understanding, so were the works of each of these bodhisattvas. Having thoroughly studied and mastered all the teachings, each bodhisattva dwelt peacefully in clear understanding of reality and freely guided all beings. Each manifested himself in the innumerable Buddha lands and was compassionate towards all sentient beings without becoming indolent and complacent. Consequently, each attained mastery of all the methods of saving others. These bodhisattvas exhaustively mastered the essentials of the sutras for bodhisattvas. Thus, their names were known everywhere, providing guidance throughout the 10 quarters. Countless Buddhas all protected them. All these bodhisattvas had already abided where all Buddhas abided. They had already stood by what all great sages established. They widely spread the teachings of the Tathagatas, each acting as a great teacher for all other bodhisattvas. Through deep meditation and wisdom, each guided multitudes of people, discerning the true nature of all things. Each understood the realities of sentient beings. With clear perception of all the Buddha lands, they manifested their bodies in those lands as quickly as lightning flash to make offerings to the Buddhas. They fully attained the all-pervasive wisdom of fearlessness and clearly realized the illusory nature of all things. Tearing down Mara's nets, they sever all knots and bonds of attachment. Surpassing the stages of Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, they attained the samadhis of emptiness, formlessness, and non-desire. They effectively used skillful means to demonstrate the teachings of the three vehicles. Then, for the sake of Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, the bodhisattvas manifested their own passing into nirvana. In reality, however, they were non-active and non-acquisitive. With the awareness that all existence neither arises nor perishes, they realized that all things are equal and non-differentiated. They were in possession of countless dharanis and 100,000 samadhis. Having the wisdom of knowing the various faculties of sentient beings, they were in the samadhi of vast and universal tranquility. Deeply entering the Dharma treasury of bodhisattvas, they attained the Buddha Garland Samadhi, through which they expounded and proclaimed all the sutras. As they dwelt in deep samadhi, they beheld all the countless Buddhas of the present, and in an instant they visited them all, saving those in the state of extreme affliction, whether or not they had time to practice the way. They discerned and revealed to them the ultimate truth. Having acquired all of the Tathagata's wisdom of eloquence, they were in full command of all languages, through which they enlightened all beings. Going beyond all worldly affairs, their minds were always serene and were settled on the path to emancipation. All things were in accordance with their will. They became friends of all beings without being asked, ready to carry the heavy burden of the multitude of beings. Holding the most profound Dharma treasury of the Tathagatas, they protected the seeds of Buddhahood to keep them from perishing. Having awakened great compassion, they took pity on sentient beings, uttered kind words, and endowed them with the Dharma eye. They blocked the paths to the three evil realms and opened the gate to the good realms. Without being asked, they gave the Dharma to the multitude of beings, just as dutiful children love and respect their parents. They looked upon all sentient beings as their own selves. With all the roots of good, they brought all sentient beings to the other shore, enabling them to attain the immeasurable virtue of all Buddhas. The sacred and pure wisdom was beyond comprehension. Countless numbers of bodhisattva mahasattvas, such as those described here, joined the Buddha's assembly at once. Namo. Thank you very much for bearing with me. I think this is a very interesting section. Now, my question to you is, do you recognize this quote? No? Nobody? What does it remind you of? Does it sound familiar in any way? What is it talking about?
The birth of Shakyamuni and then going all the way to, I guess, the future? I'm not sure about that part.
Future, the past, right? Okay. So there's two things. This is very, very good what you've said, Jen. So like there's two things. One, there's something familiar, which is the story of Shakyamuni, which you also know is what I'm going to talk about today, right? But there's also something else. Something perhaps that transcends that personal story, that particular story, right? Because he's talking, one of the interesting things here about the way they have translated this, it's sometimes it uses the plural and sometimes the singular, right? And when they use the singular, they always use the male, which we could argue with, but I'm not going to get into that today. I've talked and written about that elsewhere, because in the Chinese, they don't use the gender pronoun. But anyway, so there's two elements, which I think is very important. One is a familiar story that we associate with the life of the Buddha Shakyamuni. And then there's a multiplicity, right? So this story is somehow not the story of one person, but it's a story that repeats itself, perhaps into the future, perhaps into the past, perhaps in the present, in different places, right? So you don't know where it's from, exactly. Obviously, I'm quoting, I didn't write that. No? Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Okay. There are elements as well. So the story of Dharmakara really resonates with the story of Shakyamuni in many ways, right? Dharmakara was also a king who renounced his kingdom. And there's some phrases here, if you're familiar with the Juseige, one of the things I'll talk about on Friday, you chant the Juseige in English, right? So if you're not fluent in ancient Chinese, you understand the contents of the Juseige. This expression, closing the negative paths, the evil paths, opening the good paths, right? That appears in the Juseige. So there is a resonance, of course, with the story of Dharmakara. So that's a very important hint. Thank you. So I'll tell you where it's from. So the largest sutra, right? So it's the largest sutra of immeasurable life. The Busetsu Muryo Jukyo. And it's in the volume 1, section 2. So it's almost at the very beginning of the largest sutra. Section 1 is just the assembly. Right? So most sutras begin, I would say almost like 99% of them begin with a list of the disciples that are bearing witness to the Buddha's teaching. And so the largest sutra is no exception. So it starts, the Buddha was at this place, and in attendance were all of these great monks, great bodhisattvas, and so on. And then very interestingly, I've quoted section 2 in its integrity. This is not the Buddha speaking. But the largest sutra just tells us who's there at this important moment when the Buddha is going to give the teaching, and then tells us this story. Interesting, right? So the largest sutra contains the story of Shakyamuni Buddha. I look at the largest sutra as a kind of summary, a compendium of the whole Buddhist canon. I mean, in a deep sense, you could say that every sutra contains the teaching of every other sutra. That's the kind of logic of the Avatamsaka Sutra, right? But in this case, like things like the story of Shakyamuni Buddha are already in the largest sutra. And I think there's something very interesting going on here, right? Because it's not just the story of Shakyamuni Buddha that we recognize, that we know. But the sutra doesn't tell us this is the story of Shakyamuni Buddha who's about to give the teaching. Just presents it as a kind of blueprint, if you want, of what happens. So, as we've said, this is not a story that is unique. It's a pattern. Oh, please. Yeah, go ahead.
So, having attended last night, this actually reminds me of the story of you. Because you were in denial, and then everything opened up.
Right.
Right? And it's probably the story of all of us.
Right.
Because we were all in denial, and maybe still are to some extent. And it actually reminds me from the Christian tradition of the story of the Apostle Paul, right? Who becomes this titan within the Christian religion.
Thank you so much. You go in one step further, but I think what you're saying is true. Insofar, and this is a very fundamental Mahayana teaching, all beings will eventually become Buddha. All beings without exception will eventually become Buddha. And so this is the story of all beings, which means it's my story, it's your story, it's all of our stories at some point, right? So that's true. That's a great reflection. That's what I was going next. I love it when the audience guesses what the next slide without having seen it. About Paul, I don't know enough, but thank you for drawing that connection. And I'll be happy to learn more about that. So,
We have a question.
please, yeah.
So if we embrace that thought and that insight, because I'm an educator, so I always think about it from the perspective of an educator and how all people and all students hold potential and gifts. And somewhere along their path, something must have happened that maybe made them go off course. And I know this is going to sound kind of off but if we think about like the prison system and things like that,
Okay.
and how it's not about seeing a person from the time they were born. And if you're saying that all beings, without exception, would become Buddha, that includes all those people that we imprison. And so how do we change that system so that we see them in this way and don't make things get worse? It's never about like, how do we help? I mean, some people are on that path of like, let's help them to find who they really are. But for the most part, a lot of people are not thinking in that way. It's more like, how can we lock them up forever? Or, so I'm always just thinking like, because as a teacher, I'm always trying to help my students to be the best version of themselves. And so that's why I'm actually exploring Buddhism, because I want to go deeper into like understanding it. Yeah.
I think I will just say that's a big question. Thank you so much. That's a good question. I will just say something very briefly, and I hope that the rest of the presentation and the way it's flowing will answer some of where your question is coming from. What I would say just now, my intuitive sense is that first what needs to change is how you see people, and then the systems will change, right? I think that's the first step, because the systems are there because people are looking at other people in a certain way, right? So I don't think, well, they are in deep interdependence, right? What's first, chicken or egg? But I think it's a very long and complicated question. But this whole presentation, this whole seminar is about relationship and about what relationship does. So I'm hoping that as I continue talking about the life story of the Buddha, some of that will be addressed. And if not, let's reconvene a bit later and talk about it again. Okay? Thank you. So, this is a pattern. Right? This is the story about all of us, in a way. Right? So it's not the story of an unique individual, of a hero. It's what happens. It's the process of awakening. And so the interesting thing here as well, from the Mahayana perspective, we say, oh, the Buddha didn't become awakened in this life. Right? The Buddha didn't go through this process to become awakened. The Buddha already was awakened. And what he's doing is displaying how awakening happens, which resonates with what you've all been saying. So this life of Shakyamuni is almost like a theater, where he is demonstrating, where he is displaying how the process of awakening works. So it's a blueprint for all seekers. And it has implications for all of us, for the people in prison, for all kinds of people. So, interesting, in Sanskrit, a sutra that talks about the light of the Buddha is called Lalita Vishtara. Lalita is kind of play. Vishtara is extensive, limitless. So this is a play, and it's a play both in the sense of a theater play, but also in the sense of something playful, something light. It's not something heavy, serious that he's doing. This is a chore, this is a big duty. No, the bodhisattvas, the Buddhas, perform the beneficial activities in a light way, in a playful way. And this also appears in a text that we chant. And again, and you chant it in English as well. So for those of you who are not fluent in ancient Chinese, for those of us who are not fluent in ancient Chinese, the Shoshinge, right? Yubon no Lingen Jinzu. So Shinran Shonin uses this yu in the onyomi is a sobu, is to play, right? So the bodhisattvas are playing in the forest of Bono, in the forest of blinding angst. And in this forest, they manifest the Jinzu, these magical powers, right? What are magical powers? I have my own interpretations of that means. Of that. I can get into that if you want later, right? But I don't take it as performing acts of magic, in a sense. The magical power is connecting with all different kinds of people. That's the most magical and difficult thing to do. Being able to speak the language of every person. And that doesn't mean just speaking different languages, like English or Japanese or Spanish. It means truly connecting with the heart of every different person. This is the greatest magical power of these bodhisattvas. Now, how do they do that? How do they connect with all beings? How do they return to the world of samsara and liberate all beings? Playfully, lightly. And so the story of the Buddha is called the story of limitless play, of extensive play. So it is a display, but it's also a play. It's also like a game. Okay? So I think this is important as we move forward to discuss this, the core of this story. Now, another, I don't know, do you have any thoughts on this playfulness, asobu?
So when you're saying, I love how you're saying that it goes beyond being able to speak different languages, but it's about being able to engage the audience.
Right.
Being able to draw people in. Because my grandfather was a Buddhist, but like I can't really get my children to be interested. So something I think about is like, what is something that we can do to increase the people that see the beauty of these teachings. And I think that that's something that we should be considering, you know, like it might not, if it's not working right now, because when I see that what's happening in the temples, a lot of it is like the people are aging and they're not able to draw in the younger generations. But I really feel that this philosophy and the teachings are so powerful. So how can we speak in a way that is engaging? And how can we be transformative, not just being stuck in one position? I know that it can be scary. So that's just something I'm thinking about.
Thank you. No, I think that's a great question. Now, I'm going to be very unhelpful. So one of the questions that I was asked when I was invited to give this seminar, so as I said before, I like to speak prompted by somebody else's interest. So we had a few discussions with Bishop Umetani and with Dexter, with Reverend Higa about what I could speak about. And one of the things that was mentioned was, oh, how do you share this teaching, right? And so what I'm doing, without talking explicitly about it, is to show you how I share it, right? Now, that works where I live. That works in Europe, in various communities of converts. It is resonating with some people. Now, what works in Hawaii, you need to figure it out. I'm very happy to share with you my experience, but your context is different. And what I would say to you is, speak the language, that's your magical power. Speak the language of your children. Speak the language of the generation you try to reach out. I mostly tend to attract people in my generation, not younger, not older. There are exceptions. There are exceptions, but people who resonate with how I present things tend to be people in my age range. So let's say from 30 to 50, or from 25 to 55, something like that. Now, how are you presenting the Dharma to people of which generation? The most important thing I would say, how do you explain it to yourself? I can only explain the Dharma in a way that makes sense to me. So before I can share it with anybody, I need to explain it to myself. Sure, I study, I receive from teachers, right? I read texts, I translate, I do all these things. I receive the teaching. But I cannot just parrot. I cannot say the same things. I could. But then very few people are going to be able to resonate with that. I have to receive, I have to digest, and I have to make sense of it. I have to explain it to myself. I have to talk to myself about it. And if it makes sense to me, when I explain it to somebody else, there's a chance that it resonates. There's no guarantee, right? Now, it's hard to do it to people who are of a different generation. It's very hard, I understand. But it's not impossible. I mean, you know your children. You know what they like. You know how they talk. You know what they think. You know what they are worried about. You know what they care about. So relate at that level, I would say. And find a language in the broadest sense, that speaks to them. What captures their attention? What are they into? All of these things is what I would say. Yeah. Thank you. It's a great question again. Anyway, the playfulness, I believe, is something we can engage with, but we are not, or I am not a great bodhisattva. I'm not a Buddha. So I'm not doing this in a in this free-flowing, playful way. No, that's not my reality. That's not my existence. That's not how I perceive it. And yet, there are elements, there are moments when it can be enjoyable. It can be playful as well. Anyway, I'm sure we'll get back to that. Thank you. And so, when we're talking about Shakyamuni Buddha, there's one thing that emerges sometimes, right? And this is a kind of misconception, I would say. We think, oh, Amida Buddha has to do with other power. Shakyamuni Buddha has to do with self-power. Sure, I mean, there's a logic to that kind of narrative, that kind of thinking. So, because the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha, connected to the era of the right Dharma, are presented as the teachings of self-power, that according to a certain understanding of Buddhism, only work for 500 years. Right? And then Shakyamuni Buddha is presented as this paradigmatic example of the self-power practitioner. Right? The way the story is told, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the story of Shakyamuni Buddha, he left the palace. He did these things. He became awakened. He taught a lot of people. He did it. He was the ultimate self-power practitioner. Right? And Amida Buddha, on the other hand, is associated with the teaching of other power, right? However, the connection between the two is way deeper. And this division might not hold when we examine it more closely. Because first of all, we know about the story of Amida Buddha, we know about this whole teaching through Shakyamuni Buddha. So this is one of the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha. And this is one of my favorite wasan by Shinran Shonin. And today we have a bit more time, so I'm going to read it in Japanese so you appreciate how it sounds. And this is my translation. This is in Jodo Wasan 88. Kuon Jitsujo Amida Butsu. Gojoku no bongu o awaremite. Shakyamuni Butsu to shimeshite zo. Shakajo ni wa ogen suru. So, Amida Buddha, having reached truth in the distant past, feeling compassion for the ordinary foolish beings of the 5 corruptions, took the form of Shakyamuni and manifested in the castle of Gaya. So Shinran Shonin very clearly, very explicitly sees Shakyamuni as a manifestation of Amida. In fact, I remember once when a very, I'm not going to mention the name because if I don't ask for permission first, I never mention names, but a very orthodox Jodo Shinshu teacher from our school, we were at temple space, like, with the statue of Amida Buddha in the center. And he said, people say that in Jodo Shinshu, there's no, in the Jodo Shinshu altar, in the Jodo Shinshu temple, there's no Shakyamuni Buddha. But I think they are wrong. You're looking at Shakyamuni Buddha right now. So Amida Buddha is Shakyamuni Buddha. Right? And Shinran Shonin makes it very clear. So, taking this into consideration, if we see Shakyamuni as manifesting Amida, and what is Amida? Well, come tomorrow. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Other power and self-power are sometimes presented as separate, distinct, right? Even opposite paths. But perhaps self-power yields into other power, revealing, in a sense, that only other power exists, that self-power is an illusion, is a temporary illusion. Right? And if we see Shakyamuni as Amida, and Amida as Shakyamuni, this starts becoming clearer. And there's also something else, because Shakyamuni's life, Shakyamuni is already awakened according to the Mahayana point of view. So he's not doing self-power to become awakened. He's showing us how the process works, right? He's displaying, he's performing how this journey works. And so, at some level, perhaps at a surface level, I mean, there's many, many tellings of the story of Shakyamuni in sutras, in non-canonical sources, in different languages from India, from China. And at the surface level, normally, what we hear is great effort, self-discipline, accomplishment. Right? That's how the story is normally told. And if we stay at the surface, that's what we hear. And these stories celebrate Shakyamuni as this great individual, this great hero who made it, who did it. However, what I'm going to suggest to you today is we're going to do an exercise that I do with my students sometimes. And I have a very multidisciplinary background because I cannot stay focused on one thing in my academic life. Thankfully, the Nembutsu seems to have grasped me, and I've stayed probably the only thing I've lasted for so long, because it doesn't depend on me. But in terms of my studies, I've moved from many disciplines. And my original background was in literature. So the first thing I learned to do as an academic was to interpret texts, to read stories. And a very interesting approach to reading stories is what is called, it has various names, right? So, but reading against the grain, resistant reading. So it's a way of looking at texts that moves beyond the surface level, the established reading, focusing on what is implied, reading between the lines. What about the secondary characters? What about the contradictions? So it's moving past the surface. Now, Terry, right? Yeah. So yesterday, you demonstrated this principle, right? So when I told my story, what did you ask me? Do you remember? So 2 questions. You wanted to know more about my grandfather, and you wanted to know how my parents felt about me pursuing the Buddhist path. So I told my story. I'm the protagonist. Right? It's all from my perspective. But here comes Terry to interrogate, yeah, but what about the other characters in this story? So you are very faithfully following the principle I was teaching, right? So you are focusing on the secondary characters, people I just mentioned in passing. But you sensed, rightly, that they were very important characters. And they were a very important part of the story I was telling. So what I suggest we do today is the same with the story of the Buddha. The same you did with my story yesterday. Let's do it with the story of Shakyamuni. And I believe that Shinran Shonin is doing something very similar in the way he reads texts. He reads between the lines. He's trying to understand what's the implication. He's definitely not a literalist who says, this is what it says at surface level, and I take it as it is. No. He goes very deep. He reads against the grain. Right? How does he read the exclusion clause? At the surface level, some people are excluded. He says, like, no, they are, all of them are included. He reads it backwards. He reads in great depth a lot of things. And so my suggestion to you, my invitation is, let's do this with the story of Shakyamuni today. But perhaps you want to say something, perhaps would have a little break, or how are you feeling? Please.
I always was confused about all these bodhisattvas. You
Right.
know, that there's lots of them.
Right.
And then now when you're talking, I'm thinking, so in every country, you know, maybe there was like a Shakyamuni that came and displayed to his people the life and the path that you could take. They were showing the people the teachings of Amida Buddha. And because I mean, it traveled from India and and it didn't come to Japan until much later. And here Shakyamuni Buddha was Japan. Is that right?
Well, I think you really need to come on Thursday. I'm going to talk about that on Thursday. Well, there's somebody they call the Shakyamuni Buddha of Japan. Do you know who that is? No? Shotoku Taishi. Shotoku Taishi is often compared to Shakyamuni Buddha because he's said to have established Buddhism in Japan. And in many ways, his story is mapped onto the story of Shakyamuni Buddha. He's a prince who's not interested in politics. Well, he does a lot of politics as well, right? But he's primarily interested in the Buddhist path. He's a very devout, a very committed aristocrat that mostly wants to focus on Buddhism. Well, the stories do that. And I think there's something like what we said at the beginning, like the process of coming to awakening, coming to realization, coming to connection with the Dharma is often similar. The story of Shinran Shonin. Well, Shakyamuni Buddha leaves the palace. We'll talk about that in a minute. Shinran Shonin leaves the monastery around the same age. Shakyamuni Buddha becomes awake and Shinran Shonin meets his teacher Honen. There's something there. Something there about how these stories work. And I'm not saying that, Shinran Shonin was Shakyamuni Buddha or Shotoku Taishi is a kind of incarnation. I'm not talking at that level. I'm saying, but there's something about the story that replicates itself. There's something about the pattern, and this is a pattern that applies perhaps to everybody at some point. And it always happens in a similar kind of way. Yeah, Rod, please, yeah.
have you thought of the parallels, historical parallels of what was going on in the time of Shakyamuni Buddha, both in terms of Western culture, Socrates as an example, and the thinking that was going through at that time? And what was interesting to me as I looked at some of that stuff was that these reformations occurred about the same time as well in many different countries. The Protestant Reformation.
In China, well, in China.
Yeah, and in China as well. And so I was kind of like, are they really all related? You know, it's fascinating. When you brought that issue up, I never thought of it quite that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think they are all related in a sense, but like I would warn, and I'm not saying you're saying that, Rod, but like I think there's a risk of thinking, oh, well, maybe there was something in the air. Or there's something like objective about this. Personally, what I feel is that there's something about the way we tell stories that replicates itself, that is very similar. But telling stories is something very deep. We are story. Story is connected to time. Time is connected to life. We are the story that we tell. So telling a story is a way of making sense of something. We're saying each of us needs to make sense of the teaching. And for that, we need to tell a story. We need to tell our own story in a certain way, right? In the light of the teaching. And that process is very similar across cultures and across individuals. It's not always the same, but it flows in a very similar kind of way. And so I always like to say this, the past keeps on changing all the time. If not, think about this. We think, oh, the past happened, what happened, happened, I cannot do anything about it. No, really. Now, looking at the room, you're all above the age of 10, right? Okay? Was that? Sometimes, yeah. I meant more objectively at this point, yeah? So, you are all different ages, but you're all above 10. And you all remember 10. Now, think about how you thought about being 10 years old when you were 20. And how you thought about being 10 years old when you were 30. And when you were 40. And I need to stop there, but some of you will continue. Think 50 and 60 and 70, right? Is it the same? You have memories of when you were 10, when you were 20, when you were 15. They have been changing throughout. The past does not stay the same. Why? Because it's a story that we keep on telling and retelling to ourselves. And the process of listening to the Dharma, encountering the Dharma, living the Dharma is a process of telling a story as well. And it's a process of telling the story of our lives in the light of this teaching. So, I'm just going to say a few things before we break, and we have a little break. So, just before we start retelling the story of Shakyamuni, and maybe, yeah, you want to think about yourselves in that process as well. But what I'm intending to do after the break, so really question this image of Shakyamuni Buddha as this lonesome hero. We do love a lonesome hero, don't we? In film, in literature. Oh, he, she did it all by themselves. How amazing, right? It's a very romantic narrative with a capital R. Then let's look at Shakyamuni in relation to many others. Shakyamuni his story is not just him. There's many others in the story, right? Let's look at those. Let's think about the grandfather and the parents and everybody else, right? Now, very important point for me is like, let's not think of Shakyamuni in opposition to Mara, but in deep interdependence with Mara, because Mara is another key character in the story of Shakyamuni Buddha. And this is moving from against or in spite of to precisely because or thanks to. Okage de, right? And I think this is the switch from the logic of self-power, which is opposition, fight, and so overcome in spite of, to the logic of other power, precisely because, thanks to. And so this is applying the teaching of interdependence, the teaching of impermanence, which you could say are the core of Shakyamuni's message. Now let's apply it to his story. And in this way, when we look at it this way, spoiler, he is enlightened by everyone. But let's take a break before. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sensei. So we'll take a 10-minute break here. So we'll come back around 7:05 or so. So yeah, please have some refreshments and use the restrooms, and then we'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you.
So, I don't know if there's any urgent thoughts, urgent comments that you want to share, or shall we start looking at the story of Shakyamuni? Yeah?
Just one comment.
Please, yeah.
I know you're talking about this, the heroes and mythic heroes, and you know, it kind of reminds me a lot about and this idea of story, right? And how we live through story and how we find meaning through story and narrative, right? Reminds me of Joseph Campbell, right?
Sure.
When you think about this idea of myth and about heroes and about these archetypes of for our lives.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I think it's in there somewhere. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. No, thank you for throwing that in. Well, there's various theories about stories. Some people say there's only 5 stories in the world. And in a way, I mean, you can see, if you focus on the similarities, you see similarities. If you focus on the differences, you see differences, of course. But yeah, I mean, there's certain patterns, and that's kind of what I was talking about, that somehow repeat. And I think there's something about the human experience and the human experience of time, that we have different cultures, different philosophies, different languages, but the biological reality of a human being is kind of similar. We experience what the Buddha taught: old age, sickness, death, right? We experience suffering, we experience disease, we experience frustration, and those experiences are kind of common to all humans. So the different ways we can make sense of those basic experiences. I mean, it's like music. There's only so many tunes you can play, right? So there's something about that. I think that's true. And thanks for mentioning that, because I wanted to mention this book and acknowledge Dexter's generosity. He lent me this book at the beginning of my stay, and I haven't been able to read it. So at this point, I'm going to give it back to him because I'm very busy. But this is an example of this reading against. And this book is very well written, and it's called Yasodhara and the Buddha. Yasodhara was the Buddha's wife. And it's telling the story from the perspective of Yasodhara, from the perspective of his wife. And that's kind of what I'm going to invite you to do now. Not so much from the perspective of the other characters, but to really acknowledge the role of these other characters. I mean, I think there's a very important point here as well, which is like the female perspective, right? And I think in Buddhism, and mindful here's a guy saying this, but we need to do more of that. There's a lot of very important women in Buddhism, and they often remain secondary characters. But I would argue the role is very important. And today we're going to talk about one of them. So, let me move forward. Let's see. Right, so the story of the Buddha contains many episodes. And there's various ways of telling it. I mean, that long Gothandai that I started with, it was long of episodes, a lot of things going on, right? So I'm going to try and focus only on 6. And hopefully, we'll cover them. Let's see. So, first episode would be leaving the palace, and what we call the 4 sights. You familiar with the 4 sights? Yeah? Anyway, leaving the palace, leaving his home. Then 2, embarking on ascetic practices. And this is, for me, one of the key characters in the story, if not the key secondary character in the story, Sujata. Sujata is a very important figure in the story of the Buddha. In a way, he's the Buddha's teacher. Then, famous, sitting under the Bodhi tree, Mara, encounter with Mara. Then, one of my favorite episodes of the story of the Buddha, being reminded he has to teach. He cannot sit back and be comfortable in his samadhi, in his peaceful state. And so the gods come and say, hey, no, you got to teach now. Then there's the interaction with his disciples, is the relationship he has with his disciples. And finally, another key point, another key moment is accepting his death. In fact, welcoming it, being brought to parinirvana by Kamaraputra, who offers him a bowl of poisoned food, not on purpose, with zero ill intent. It just happened to be in bad condition. The Buddha knows it, the Buddha eats it, accepts the offering, right? And as Buddhists, we accept offerings always, right? So he sets that example. So, let's journey through this. And at any point here, again, in the spirit of relationship, just interject. Because what I'm saying is just teasing out this idea. It's a very basic idea, that everything happens in relation. And perhaps here, I don't think I got your name. Yeah, Alison, yeah. Maybe the question you asked before, which I would be very happy to explore at the end, maybe there's some kind of an answer here, right? So, the first thing about, we're told Shakyamuni grew up in a very sheltered life. The story is a bit hyperbolic. It's like at the age of 20-something, he didn't know there was such a thing as death. He didn't know there was such a thing as illness and decay. Okay. But the point is, he was kept very, very sheltered. And some parents do that. Some parents want to shelter the kids from the dangers of the world, the ugliness of the world. Right? And there's a good intention in there. The father also wants him to inherit and be a good king and have his succession, right, assured. But there's also like an element of compassion there. But it's counterproductive. And so he keeps him very, very sheltered. However, Shakyamuni is a curious person. And whether we imagine Shakyamuni as a human being undergoing this process or as a already Buddha showing us how it all works, both ways the story works. There is this curiosity, there is this staring. He wants to move beyond, he wants to see further. He wants to see beyond the walls. Yes, he has everything he needs within the walls of the palace. He has food, he has music, he has beautiful companions. But he wants to know what's going on beyond. And so he sneaks out. And so he encounters 4 people that really change his perspective. He sees somebody who is ill. He sees somebody who is old. He sees a corpse. He sees a monk. And for the first time, he has been sheltered from seeing these things. Oh, people grow old? What's wrong with that person? I've never seen that. Oh. People are ill? What's that? People die. And what's that person doing over there? Oh, they are looking for an answer. They are trying to solve this reality, this existential problem of being alive, of having to undergo the natural process of aging, becoming ill, and dying. So this is the monk. Now, those 4 people, without them, we have no Buddha, right? If he doesn't see that person who's aging, doesn't see that person who's ill, doesn't see that dead body, that corpse, and that monk, or that renunciant, that practitioner, these questions wouldn't have emerged. This desire to look further, to seek further, wouldn't have emerged. Thanks to them, we have Buddhism today. So when we take refuge in the Buddha, we should also take refuge in these 4 people. We don't even have a name for them, as far as I know. But they are crucial. And let's not forget the charioteer, right? Who is called Channa, is instrumental as well, because he's the Buddha's accomplice. The Buddha cannot sneak out on his own. He has a friend who helps him. He enables him to get out and see these things. He's like an uncle figure who says, like, okay, you want to see what's outside? I'll take you at night. Okay, fine. He's very important as well. So, my point before, was that the palace symbolizes what I called yesterday doubt, or this basic avidya, this basic ignorance, mumyo in Japanese, right? So it's basic ignorance, basic darkness, being in the dark about the facts of life. And so these 4 people are shining light on Shakyamuni and enabling him to see further. And I think it's very interesting that, and we won't have time in these 5 days to talk about some of my favorite wasan, which are the wasan at the end of the Shosomatsu wasan, the Giwaku-san, right? The ones that talk about doubt, and the borderland, and the womb. And he uses all of these metaphors that to me resonate with the story of Shakyamuni, right? So Shakyamuni is living the palace. And the palace is symbolically like a womb, like a castle, where he is in ignorance, in doubt, self-enclosed, self-contained, realm of pride of ignorance, a lotus flower which remains closed. So in the Pure Land tradition, we have all of these images to talk about the borderland. And to me resonate with the story of Shakyamuni and the palace, which is this, like a lotus flower that is closed. And when Channa says like, okay, let's go out at night, let's see what's going on in the outside world, it's like, and he sees all this suffering, the flower opens. And then he sees the world around him, right? So, as the first instance, right? So, yes, he's curious, he has this initiative, but it's thanks to these 5 people that he can move beyond, that he can move further. I'm happy to send you the slides, by the way, so don't worry. I'm happy to share them afterwards. And they keep on changing. This morning they change again, so everything is changing. But yeah, that's fine. You can take pictures. So I feel we have a great debt of gratitude with these 5 people as well. They're a very important part of the Buddhist tradition somehow. Now, Shakyamuni decides to pursue the path of ascetic practices, right? So he realizes there's this suffering in the world. And he realizes there are people trying to find an answer to these problems of human existence. And so he follows the established paths of his time, right? And you had a lot of different teachers, a lot of different religious paths, and some of them were very demanding and severe. But they're very relying on what we call self-power, or what you could say like a very strong willpower. So he's trying to solve this problem, solve the problem of suffering through sheer willpower. I will make it happen, right? Jigo jitoku. So I do, I obtain, right? I practice, I get it. So he perseveres on this path for 6 years. And the way he's doing it, he's following a path where he's fasting. He's bringing himself to the edge of death. Maybe the idea was that if he died, he would be free. But anyway, he's taken a very serious vow that he's gonna persevere on this path. And he's very committed. And he's very neshin, right? He's very like serious person. He's very committed to this path. But something happens that really throws him off. And I think this is the most important moment in the story of the Buddha. This encounter, I mean, the first encounter is key, of course. The encounter with Sujata, for me, is the key event in the life of the Buddha. This is where he becomes awakened. Under the Bodhi tree, he processes, he matures, he comes to terms with this realization. But it's this encounter that really does something to him, because it's what I was saying yesterday. He is derailed. He has a plan based on his own ego, on his own will. And then here comes this woman who, moved by compassion, I mean, there's various reasons why she offers the bowl to him. Some people say he's moved by compassion because he's so thin, he's so emaciated, right? But there's also the story that he was so emaciated that she thought he was a ghost. And she's just making an offering to a kind of supernatural being. Anyway, whatever the reason, she offers the bowl of rice. Now, he has taken this vow. He's not going to eat. He's fasting, no matter what. And he has other people kind of checking on him. He has his fellow practitioners who's taken the same vow. So not only he has to face his own limitation and his own commitment, but he has to face his sangha, his community that is they're gonna monku. If he takes the bowl of rice, they're gonna criticize, right? They're gonna complain and say, oh, Shakyamuni was no good. Look, somebody comes along, gives him a bit of rice, he gives it all up, right? They're gonna be having this kind of conversation. Now, this encounter is key. So, because at that point, he really sees his limit. He really accepts help from the outside. He breaks out of another bubble. So he came out of the bubble of the palace, his upbringing, this blindness to the very facts of life, fine. But then gets into another bubble. I can liberate myself through my own efforts, right? And then here comes Sujata, completely unaware, completely innocent, and says like, oh, you must need to eat. Please take this. And I imagine his brain short-circuited. He's like, what do I do now? And this is the key moment. This is when it happens. He accepts help from the other. You could say other power breaks through. And so he doesn't perceive it as a temptation, or maybe he does at first, but eventually welcomes it. And this is where the transition from self-power to other power takes place. From the perspective of self-power, the bowl of rice is a temptation, is something to be resisted, avoided, kept at bay. From the perspective of other power, it's like, oh, thank you. I depend on you. I accept your help because I accept that I am limited. So, anyway, I have many thoughts here, but I think this is a very important moment. And the bowl of rice is kind of this life-giving symbol that also gives awakening. Because thanks to the bowl of rice, he then goes under the Bodhi tree and he becomes awakened. So he's also acknowledging that awakening is not just a matter of the mind. You need a healthy body. You need to be well fed. Thank you. Thank you, Caroline, for feeding us. So, I don't know, any thoughts at this point? Do you want to share anything?
Leaning on our Shin Buddhist kind of background, could this moment of awakening kind of be kind of the basis of Shinran's Shinjin? kind of realizing that he's a failure, basically crashing and burning, and then compassion breaks through to help enlighten and awaken him to find another way. And that's just a thought.
I think that's right. I mean, that's the same flavor. We're talking about the same flavor. I can't remember where because I've given so many talks, but I think because it was based on geography and it involved going from Hilo to Kona. So it must have been on Big Island, but you weren't there. It was on the Hilo side. I don't know if there's anybody from Hilo today. No. So I was saying that, you are in Hilo. I mean, I was in Hilo and I had to get to Kona. And I'm the kind of person who would say, I would walk from Hilo to Kona. I would enjoy doing that. But then there are all these people offering you a ride. So like Reverend Blaine comes, come on, Enrique, hop in. It's fine. It's like, no, I'm going to walk all the way. I'm committed to this. But there's all these people offering you a ride. And the moment you accept that ride, you are accepting your limitation, but you're also accepting that you depend on each other. And I think in terms of Shinran's hitting the wall and realizing his limitation and accepting the Buddha's help, there's something that it's the same flavor. I don't think it's exactly the same story, but it's in the same realm of experience, if you want. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, no, I won't take the right. I can do it. But there's one point when we're tired enough, we do take the right. And that moment comes for everybody. So we don't need to worry too much. And it's like, oh, maybe I'm not ready to take the right. You still need to walk another couple of miles. That's okay. Keep walking. The right is always there. The right of the primal vow is always there. So, namandats, always there. Always ready to take you, like Linda and Susan coming here today, right? Namandats. So, Sujata, I want to go to the place. There's a temple to Sujata, very close to Bodh Gaya, on a small island in the river. I've never been, and I really want to go. I feel so strongly about her. I think she's like I'm saying here, like the Buddha's mother. Queen Maya, we have more reverence, right? Sujata, though, she's like birthing the Buddha again. She's birthing him as a Buddha. That encounter, that feeling, is what makes him awakened. So anyway, I think this is the key moment. But there's more, of course, because then he goes under the Bodhi tree. So I imagine, he felt energized, he felt refreshed, but he also must have felt confused. What did just happen? Right? One of these experiences was like, I was on this path for 6 years. I was so committed to this way of doing things. And then this encounter has completely derailed my life. I'm going to go and sit under the tree and see what happens. But here, another very important encounter, more canonical if you want, right, is the encounter with Mara. And even in the larger sutra, right, in the way in the quotation we started with, there is this sense of like the Buddha conquers Mara, the Buddha defeats Mara. When we look at the story, I think there's something else going on, because Mara is something internal to the Buddha, right? Mara is his shadow. So once he's accepted his limitation, once he's realized he cannot do it all on his own, then he sees more clearly who he is. And to me, the experience under the Bodhi tree is the Nishu Jinshin. You know the Nishu Jinshin, the two types of deep mind? Master Shandao talks about one deep mind is seeing clearly that we are caught in the cycle of samsara, that we are bound by bonno constantly, with no chance of coming out of that. That's our reality. You see that clearly. The verb he uses is shinchi. Shin is the shin of Shinjin, and chi is wisdom. So sometimes it's like deeply entrust, deeply believe. Okay, but it's also, I think shinchi is a kind of knowing with such certainty, seeing with such certainty that you cannot but entrust. You see something so clear, you know it's true. You see in this reality of ourselves, this darkness. Right? That's the first type of deep mind. It's very important. And this is what the Buddha is seeing under the Bodhi tree. But how can you see that? You see that because you're being illumined. Because you are at the same time embraced, this is Shandao, embraced by the 48 vows of the Buddha, the 48 vows of Amida, that promise to save people such as me, people who are completely caught in this samsaric cycle. And you also see that with huge clarity in a way that cannot be doubted. But it's not like you have to believe in this. You just see it clearly. And there's this dynamic between light and shadow. Right? You never see the light directly, but you recognize there is light because the shadow is cast. Anyway, that's the subject of tomorrow. We're talking more about the Nembutsu, and we're talking more about Amida Buddha and so on. But here Shakyamuni Buddha encounters this Mara, and he sees Mara very clearly. And the point is, the Buddha doesn't kill Mara, because later on, in all the canons, in all the different traditions, Buddhism, the Buddha talks about Mara. And somebody says, I see you, Mara. Mara is still there. It's a conversation we were having in the break, right? But now he sees through. Now he understands that Mara is there. And Mara is his shadow, is his ego, if you want, is his bono, all of these things. Now, the thing is that without Mara, Shakyamuni cannot awaken. In order to awaken, he needs to see his shadow. So again, the logic of Tariki, the logic of all the powers, thanks to the shadow, precisely because of the shadow, precisely because of Mara, he can become Buddha. Sometimes we think, oh, it'd be great if I can just get rid of all these things. If there was a magical way of like, get rid of all this, unpleasant stuff about myself and somehow cut through towards liberation, right? But no, liberation lies precisely in looking at that, precisely in engaging with that. And this is what the Buddha does under the Bodhi tree. And this is what the Pure Land tradition talks about, the Nishu Jinshin, the two types of deep mind, right? Realizing that we are Bombu and we are embraced because we are Bombu, not in spite of. We are embraced precisely because. So, Mara is almost like a mirror that is showing the Buddha who he truly is. So again, thanks to Mara, we have Buddhism. And here, I've talked about all of this. Very interesting. Shinran Shonin talks about Maras in many places, or quotes texts about Maras in many places. Maras, these figures, right? This demon, this shadow. But particularly in the Genzeri Yakusan, which is a very interesting section. And personal story that I have with the Genzeri Yakusan. So these are the wasan, the hymns on the benefits on this life. And they are a fascinating text that I would love to talk about at more length, but again, we don't have time. But Shinran Shonin is talking about demons, about spirits, about all these things. And how for the person of the Nembutsu, for the person of Shinjin, they are not an obstacle. Actually, they are an ally. They are a protector. And my personal story with the Genzeri Yakusan, so like the wasan of the benefits in this life, is like when I did Tokudo, I got those 6 on the day that we came out of Tokudo. Or 6 that overlapped with the Genzeri Yakusan. When I did Kyoshi, I got the other 4 or 5. So there was clearly there's something that that coincidence, I don't think there's any deeper meaning to that, but that coincidence really forced me to engage with them. And I think they are really, really interesting. So the Maras, our Bonno, our shadow, right? When we walk the path of the Nembutsu, they become helpers, protectors, guides, allies. They are pointing the way for us. They are enlightening us, right? So, I'm mindful that I'm talking a lot. Please, save me from this, from my own bubble. Yeah.
So, is there a difference in the relationship between Shakyamuni and Mara and then Devadatta? Or are they similar? Although Devadatta is a real person, Mara comes out of, I imagine Mara comes out of Siddhartha's own psychological makeup or something.
His heart, right? Yeah. Devadatta is a very interesting character, right? I think Devadatta plays a very important role in Buddhism. But Devadatta, I would have to think more about what role Devadatta plays in the story of Shakyamuni. However, I mean, again, I love this subject, but it's a very subtle and complex one. The preface of Jodo Shinshu, Shinran Shonin, talks about Devadatta, Ajatasattu, Vaidehi, these great bodhisattvas who committed terrible actions to bring the teaching forth. And Shinran Shonin sees Devadatta as a very important character in this play. He sees the unfolding of the teaching in this kind of playful way, this theatrical way that we were talking about. And Devadatta, the evil monk, the evil cousin of the Buddha, is almost like the negative image of the Buddha, plays a very important role because he leads Ajatasattu to commit these terrible actions, and that in turn leads Shakyamuni to give the teaching that even the most evil person can be born in the Pure Land, can be saved, can become awakened. So this is the logic of Tariki, you see, because we can think like Devadatta bad, good, Buddha good, right? And yeah, sure, at some level that's true. But thanks to Devadatta, who led somebody to kill his father, imprison his mother, do all these things, which is Ajatasattu, the Buddha comes out with this really compassionate teaching, this really inclusive teaching. And all of that is thanks to Devadatta, in a way. So everybody plays their role. And think about your lives, think about our world as well. You know, everybody's playing some kind of role. So maybe that helps. There's somebody in my life, maybe that really annoys me. Thanks to that person, I can see what I'm like. And if that person really annoys me, maybe it's because I'm a bit like them too. Right? So nothing is wasted ever. And I think this is what I like about this. It's mottainai. So it's like nothing is ever wasted, really, in a deep sense. No experience is wasted. That doesn't mean terrible things happen, terrible things should never happen. But once they happen, they can become part of our growth, our maturation, our realization. And I think that's what Shinran is saying at the beginning of Jodo Shinshu. Yeah, but that's a huge, huge subject. Also, another beautiful wasan, the wasan on the Contemplation Sutra, Shinran Shonin just lists the name of all the characters. Devadatta, all the ministers, Ajatasattu, Vaidehi, Bimbisara. And the whole wasan is just chanting the names, like we chant the name of the Buddha. He sees them as great bodhisattvas. Everybody's playing a role. So Devadatta, yeah, and there's a story, he was falling into hell and he said like, nah, just the first syllable of the Nembutsu. And then that's enough somehow. So there's a lot about Devadatta, yeah. Thank you. No, thank you for bringing him up. I hadn't thought about him. But yeah, Mara is more like, I see Mara as kind of his shadow. Yeah, Mara is emerging from his heart, is his own reflection somehow, yeah. I'll move a bit quicker, and then I want to have more of a discussion. But I'll give you a few more examples of how this works, and I want to focus on the Buddha's death. The Buddha's death is absolutely key. Parinirvana, we call it. Well, he becomes awakened. He's in a very peaceful, comfortable state. Of course he wants to stay there. Right. And to me, this signals that awakening is a dynamic thing. Yes, he was awakened, but awakening gets deeper. In the same way we talk about Shinjin, there might be a first moment of Shinjin, but it keeps on getting deeper, keeps on maturing, growing, deepening somehow. So awakening is likewise. And so the Buddha's awakened fine, but he still has this temptation of staying in a kind of comfortable state. A new bubble, right? And so here come the two gods, Shakra and Brahma, Indra and Brahma, right? That come and remind him very politely, very reverently, that he needs to teach. And the Buddha says, actually, no, nobody's going to understand it. That, no, actually, you have to teach. They ask 3 times, as is often the case, right? So thanks to these gods, to Shakra and Brahma, we have Buddhism again. Because if Shakyamuni hadn't encountered them, he would have stayed there very comfortably, great for him. But what about the rest of us, right? So, again, these 2 gods are very important. So they take him out of his peaceful state. You have to engage with the world. You have to engage with others. Anyway, I can share that with you. And then, well, he does exactly that. So he starts engaging with others. And it's thanks to his disciples that the teaching comes out. We wouldn't have sutras if we didn't have such a person as Shariputra asking all these awkward questions. Shariputra is the student we all hope to have, who is always asking awkward questions. And Ananda is the student that we wish we didn't have because he remembers everything. And Arai Sensei said something very interesting to me recently. Do you know why Ananda remembers everything? Remembered word by word the teachings of the Buddha. Because he didn't understand them. Shariputra Mahakashapa, they got the point. They got the point. They understood. So they don't remember word by word what the Buddha said. But Ananda was hanging on to every word because he didn't really penetrate the meaning of them. But that's why he was so useful. Again, nothing is wasted. Right? So even Ananda not getting it serves a function, if you want. So, through this interaction with the students, all the teachings, all the sutras come out. The Buddha doesn't just talk. He's responding to questions he gets asked. But with one exception. There is one important exception. There is one sutra that is not given in response to a question. And, well, you have the answer there. It's the Amida Kyo, the Amida Sutra. So interesting. And Shakyamuni goes right into it. If you read the sutras, first you have the assembly, who's there, the place, the time, blah, 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 all the disciples. And then Ananda says, oh, what's going on today? You look different. Or Vaidehi requests. Or Shariputra asks one of the famous awkward questions. But in the Amida Kyo, the Buddha just starts speaking. But he's not one-sided. He's talking to Shariputra. It's almost like they were having this conversation before. I love the style of the Amida Kyo. The Amida Kyo is like it's like this spontaneity. Like the Buddha is infused. The Buddha is full of energy and is just sharing this teaching with enthusiasm. But it's almost like Sharihotsu, right? So it's almost like he's talking to Shariputra who doesn't actually speak in the sutra at all. But it's almost like they were having a conversation that we're not accessing, that we don't know about. And then the Buddha keeps on talking to Shariputra. So there is still a relationship, there's still a relationality, a dynamic there. So anyway, we might talk about the Amida Sutra tomorrow, maybe not. I just want to get to the end of the Buddha's life, which I think is one of the most profound. So after having turned 80, the Buddha accepted an offering of food that was not in good condition. The Buddha knew this and knew that ingesting the food will bring an end to his life. However, the person who offered, Kamaraputra, who was a smith, right, had no ill intention and did not realize the outcome of his action. So he offered with a pure heart. It was just an accident. It was unfortunate, right? Now, however, the Buddha, following the rule of monks, of renunciants at the time, accepts the offering. And accepting it means he has to actually ingest it, has to actually consume it. So the transaction is completed, right? So that way, Kamaraputra accumulates the merit. So it's not like, oh, thanks, yeah, okay, no, I'm not going to eat that. No, thank you. I take it into my body. It's this deep, intimate bond, right? And so we see before how the bowl of rice from Sujata gives the Buddha life and gives him awakening, his first awakening. That still deepens as he goes on, of course, as we were saying. Now, the second bowl of rice brings him to death and to the final awakening, what we call parinirvana. Because in some traditions we talk about the Buddha, the awakening the Buddha realizes during his life is awakening or nirvana with residue, something left. In some stories he still gets a toothache, right? Or experiences some discomfort, experiences some tiny bit of trouble. Now, when it comes to the end, the awakening is complete. And to me this resonates with, in this life, we awaken to Shinjin, we enter the stage of non-retrogression, but we are still bound by Bonno. We're still Bombu. And at the moment of death, we are born in the Pure Land. It's only at the end of our lives that that process becomes complete. I'm not saying that Shinjin and the awakening of the Buddha are the same. They are not. But the structure of both processes, like the stories we were talking about, is parallel. And it's a very similar dynamic at very different levels. Okay? Now, the two bowls in the story, very interesting. The two bowls, one gives life, one gives death. They both give awakening. So awakening is a relation. Is what I'm seeing here. And the two bowls are like two sides of a coin, teaching us life and death are but two sides of a coin. Without life, you cannot have death. Without death, you cannot have life. You only start living once you face your own death. So, and what I love about this, the way the Buddha dies, which makes me love him even more, again, is the ultimate derailment. His life never goes according to plan. In India, the proper story about how a sage should die, a sage enters in samadhi, chooses the moment of death in a very conscious, deliberate way. Everything goes according to plan, because mostly he is a saint. The Buddha dies by accident in a way, but a beautiful accident where he is accepting, again, his relationship with others. Is the ultimate sacrifice, if you want. Is the ultimate acceptance of his limitation and his boundedness, his entanglement with all beings, his dependence on all beings. So, I think then Kamaraputra is a very important character, for sure. I think I've said most about this. I mean, we also have to keep in mind that you say, oh, well, if somebody offers you something poisoned, you just eat it. Well, the Buddha is at the end of his life. He had 40 years of teaching, He had a full life. At that time, 80 years was a very long time, right? And so he just kind of surrenders. He just kind of lets go. Maybe for us, you know, the story might play out in different ways in our day and age. But I think the message still remains and is still relevant. And so I just want to conclude by reiterating this point, how Shakyamuni is showing us the path of other power. The story of Shakyamuni is expressing the logic of other power, how we become awakened in relation, in dependence to others, always. And his awakening, from the story, I don't see it as a fixed state. It's an ever dynamic process that evolves, that deepens, that is shaped by all of these connections. So he becomes awakened and further awakened until the parinirvana, thanks to interaction with many others. So these secondary characters are not just context. They are something much more important. They're not just the background that highlights how amazing he is, right? They are running the story. They are driving it. And they are awakening Shakyamuni and also sharing in his awakening. So it's this mutual dependence all the time. And in this way, I see the story of the Buddha as expressing other power. And tomorrow we'll carry on talking about Amida Buddha and Namo Amida Butsu, which is also very connected to this theme. But anyway, I think I've said enough. So we still have a few minutes. And yeah, any thoughts? I'm sure we'll carry on talking anyway afterwards, but have you heard this kind of explanation before? No? Okay.
Yeah, might Shakyamuni have meant to teach a final lesson, with his, taking the poisoned food? And it was an opportunity. He knew he was ill, and because at the end, didn't he say something like, "Follow, be your own light," that sort of thing. So
yeah. So what do you mean?
Well, that it wasn't just an unplanned.
I see. Okay.
I mean, but he didn't, plan to kind of commit suicide, but the opportunity came along, with the poisoned food from a supporter, and might he have wanted to, make a point, make a big final point, with his disciples, gathered, around him, and and kind of not go quietly into the night, I guess.
Yes, no, I think you're right. And I think in a way, when I was saying that it's derailed, it wasn't like he still had like 40 years more of life, and not in that sense. That's right, he was ill, and he's journeying towards, one theory is he's journeying towards his place of birth, and he wants to die close to his home, the place where he came from. So he's already sensing the end of his life. But somehow, if the idea was to get back to Lumbini, back to Kapilavastu and so on, it doesn't make it in the end. So I think there's still an element of welcoming the unexpected. There's still an element of disruption, if you want. But there's also, I think that's the genius of Shakyamuni, Dexter, because he sees this opportunity, and he's like, this might be the final teaching, right? But I don't know. We don't know how he felt, of course, at the end of the day. But the point is what the story means for us, I think, always. Yeah.
Other questions for Sensei?
Or any thoughts?
Or thoughts or comments?
Yeah.
Following that line, he might have thought maybe this is an opportunity and I can take advantage of this. And it just kind of all of a sudden I thought about my grandmother when my grandmother was on the process of dying. She finally decided today's the day, you know. I've lived a good life. It's not like she wanted to commit suicide or anything. She just decided, I'm not going to eat anymore. I'm not going to drink anymore. I'm happy. You know, don't be sad for me. And she died, you know.
That happens. I mean, sometimes people stop eating. It's almost like the body cannot take anymore, right? And I mean, sometimes we're thinking perhaps we're attributing too much will. I'm not talking about the Buddha now, but I'm talking about some of those. It's not like the person decides necessarily, but it comes to a point when it just happens, right? The body kind of gives up. And the mind is ready as well. Well, they're not separate in a way, right? Well, yeah, of course. Comes a point when it's like, oh, okay, I'm ready to let go now. I mean, one story that recurs a lot. So when somebody is terminally ill, and I've heard this story many times, it's a real story, and the family wants to be there at the final moment. And they are holding the hand, they are always there. The person always dies when they go for toilet break. Yeah, because then the person can let go. They are holding that person. They are not letting them go. And it's in that moment that the person is like, Namanda. You know, that's the kind of letting go. So, yes, we're talking about that process. No.
This brings up a thought of physician-assisted suicide. And I've had friends who've chosen that path. And it is, for a person outside looking in, it's kind of a shock. But especially if they knew that person who was full of life all the time, and she suffered many months of treatment of cancer and everything, and she just decided, that's it. And we get the phone call and, well, you can't visit today. You know, she just died. And she just died. I've had my brother tell me the same thing. On his birthday, he died 5 days later, but he just said, that's it already. You know, let's not do this. And he died. So it is, I think it is a controllable thing. It's something that people feel what happens to them. It's a sad moment for everybody else around them, but it's interesting. How do you provide that moment of departure for the rest of the family? And I've asked, well, this is like 20 years ago. I was asked by a family to come and do a healing touch session. And just because we were friends. And I tell my friends, you know, when I do the healing touch stuff, everybody dies, you know. and there's
okay, I'm going to take some distance from you right now, Rob.
So we did it. I went to hospice, and person was there, and I had the family gather around, and I said, everybody say goodbye, and everything went calmly, and she died. I mean, it was just beautiful. It was really nice, and they were very thankful for that moment. But it's interesting that there is this unexplainable something that occurs. It's very interesting. Yeah.
If you think in former times, these were not issues so much because life couldn't be prolonged artificially in quite the same way. So when the moment came, it came. So I'm not arguing against or for anything, but I'm just saying that, yeah, this is a development of medicine, and yeah, I mean, this issue didn't come up in the past so much. I mean, the issue of suicide, yes. The issue of prolonging life that is, we could say, naturally ending, not so much. I think a big part of it is like how the person feels, right? Where the person is at with it, yeah. Yeah, great, yeah. Before we move on we're gonna have some gathering and we can carry on chatting more informally, but I would like to finish this session by thanking you all for being here and putting up with me. Contrary to my own teaching, I've talked a lot, and I endeavor to talk less tomorrow. But let's finish by putting our hands together and hearing the Nembutsu, which is that ride that is always there for us to take us. Namandavs, 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 namandavs. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sensei, and thank you to everybody for coming tonight and for joining us for the second night of the summer session. Big mahalo to our staff, Dave Atchison and Derek on tech. Thank you to Carolyn for all the food and the wonderful refreshments, and thank you to Dex and being part of the committee and helping us to organize everything. Again, thank you to Sensei for a wonderful lecture again, a session tonight. And so after a brief break, we will have an informal kind of Pauhana talk story session with Sensei, so you can have other questions or other things that are on your heart and mind from these first 2 days that you'd like to kind of talk story with him about. So please, we invite you to stay for that, and if not, we will see you tomorrow night for the third night of the summer session. So again, mahalo to everyone here and everyone online.